The belief that decides your future. Imagine 2 children, sitting in the same classroom, the same teacher, the same lessons, the same opportunities. Point 1 question appears on the board. The first child raises their hand immediately. The second looks down, not because they don't know the answer, but because they're afraid of getting it wrong. Years pass. The first child keeps trying, keeps failing, keeps learning. The second avoids every challenge, avoids every risk, avoids every possibility of failure. Eventually, one builds a life full of growth. The other spends years wondering, why does success always happen to other people? Most of us believe the answer is intelligence or talent or luck. But what if everything you've been taught about success is incomplete? What if the biggest difference between extraordinary people and everyone else isn't what they can do, but what they believe they can become? A belief so small you barely notice it, yet powerful enough to shape every decision, every failure, every opportunity, and ultimately your entire life. Carol Dweck spent decades studying one simple question: why do some people grow stronger after failure, while others give up? Her answer may completely change the way you see yourself, because the most dangerous limitation isn't the one the world places on you. It's the one you quietly accept. Act 1. The story you believe about yourself. Imagine a little girl is drawing. She isn't worried if it's perfect. She isn't afraid of making mistakes. She simply draws. Now imagine that same girl 10 years later. The teacher asks a difficult question. She knows the answer, but she stays silent, not because she isn't intelligent, but because she's afraid of being wrong. What changed? She didn't lose her intelligence. She didn't lose her potential. She lost something far more valuable: the freedom to fail. Somewhere along the way, without anyone noticing, she began writing a story about herself. I'm just not good at math. I'm not creative. I'm not a leader. People like me don't succeed. At first, they were only thoughts. Then they became beliefs, and eventually those beliefs became reality, because every decision she made was filtered through the story she believed. When an opportunity appeared, she hesitated. When life became difficult, she stepped back. When failure arrived, she saw it as proof that the story was true. Carol Dweck discovered something remarkable: most people aren't limited by their abilities. They're limited by the meaning they attach to those abilities. Point 1 person sees failure as a verdict, another sees failure as information. Point 1 says, I can't do this. The other quietly adds, yet. One small word. Point 4 simple letters, yet, and suddenly, failure is no longer the end of the story. It's only the beginning of learning. Think about your own life. How many dreams have you abandoned, not because they were impossible, but because you decided they weren't meant for someone like you? The most powerful prison has no walls, no locks, no guards. It's the invisible story you repeat to yourself every single day, and the frightening part is that after repeating it long enough. Act 2. The day failure changed everything. Imagine 2 students receive the exact same exam. Both study hard, both feel confident. A week later, the results arrive. They both fail. The first student stares at the grade for a few seconds, then quietly whispers, maybe I'm just not smart enough. The second student feels the same disappointment, the same frustration, the same embarrassment, but asks a completely different question: what did I miss? One exam. Point 1 result. Point 2 completely different futures. The difference wasn't intelligence. It wasn't effort. It wasn't luck. It was interpretation. Carol Dweck spent decades studying students, athletes, musicians, and business leaders. Again and again, she found the same pattern. Success wasn't determined by how often people failed. It was determined by what failure meant to them. For some people, failure becomes an identity. I failed turns into, I am a failure. And once that happens, every challenge becomes dangerous, because every challenge has the power to expose them. So they stop trying, they avoid difficult conversations, they choose easy goals, they stay where success feels guaranteed, not because they lack potential, but because protecting their image becomes more important than growing. Others experience the exact same failure, but see something completely different. Not a verdict. A lesson, not proof they're incapable, proof that there's something new to learn. To them, failure isn't the opposite of success. It's part of it. Think about a child learning to walk. They don't fall once, they fall hundreds of times, yet no one looks at a toddler and says, maybe walking just isn't for you. Failure is expected, encouraged, even celebrated. Somewhere along the way, we forget that lesson. We begin treating mistakes as evidence of our limits, instead of evidence that we're stretching beyond them. And perhaps that's the greatest tragedy, not that people fail, but that so many stop long before they discover what they were truly capable of. Act 3. The compliment that can destroy your potential. Imagine a little boy comes home from school. He places his test on the kitchen table. 95 out of 100. His parents smile, they hug him, then they say, you're so smart. It sounds like love. It sounds like encouragement. It sounds perfect. But what if those 3 words quietly changed the course of his life? Carol Dweck discovered something surprising. The words we hear as children can become the beliefs we protect as adults. When a child is praised for being smart, they begin to believe their value comes from proving it. Every success becomes evidence, every mistake becomes a threat, because if intelligence is who they are, then failure feels like losing part of their identity. So something begins to change. The child who once explored now hesitates. The student who loved difficult problems starts choosing easier ones, not because they stopped learning, but because they became afraid of looking less intelligent. Now imagine another child, same score, same proud parents, but this time, they say something different. You worked really hard for this. A small change, only a few words, but an entirely different message. The first child learns, my value comes from talent. The second learns, my progress comes from effort. Years later, one avoids challenges to protect an image, the other seeks challenges to build a better future. Neither child remembers the exact conversation, but both carry its meaning for the rest of their lives, and perhaps that's why so many adults spend years chasing perfection, not because they love excellence, but because they're still trying to protect a label someone gave them. When they were children, the most powerful words are rarely the loudest. Sometimes, they sound like praise, but secretly, they become permission to stop growing. Act 4. The life you never lived. Imagine, you're 80 years old. You're sitting alone, looking back, not at your successes, but at your chances. The business you never started, the conversation you never had, the country you never visited, the dream you convinced yourself wasn't realistic. Now ask yourself, what stopped you? Was it really a lack of talent, or was it something far more invisible? Dweck believes most people don't fail because they lack ability. They fail because they stop growing long before they reach their potential. The tragedy isn't failure. The tragedy is deciding your future before you've even tested your limits. Every time you say, I'm just not that kind of person, you close a door. Every time you say, people like me can't do that, you build another wall, brick by brick, belief by belief, until one day, the prison feels like home. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Your personality isn't finished. Your intelligence isn't fixed. Your confidence isn't permanent. The person you are today is only the result of the thoughts, habits, and decisions you've repeated. Nothing more, nothing less. The people we admire were not born fearless. They became different because they kept acting, long after doubt appeared, long after failure arrived, long after everyone else stopped trying. Growth isn't a single moment. It's a decision, repeated again and again. Perhaps the greatest mistake you can make is believing you've already met the best version of yourself, because maybe that person has been waiting on the other side of one difficult decision. Point 1. Uncomfortable conversation. Point 1 more attempt. Point 1 more lesson. Point 1 more failure. Not because failure makes you stronger, but because it reveals who you're becoming. And someday, you'll look back, not at the times you failed, but at the moment you finally stopped letting fear decide who you could become. Final act. The person you could have been. Imagine 2 versions of you standing face to face. Point 1 is the person you are today. The other is the person you could have become. Same childhood, same fears, same failures. The only difference, one of them never stopped growing. Now ask yourself, which one would recognize the other? Most people spend their lives waiting to feel confident, waiting to feel ready, waiting for the perfect moment, but that moment never comes, because confidence isn't what creates action. Action creates confidence. Think back to every skill you've ever learned: walking, speaking, driving. None of them felt natural. At first, you became better because you were willing to look bad before you looked good. And yet, when it comes to our dreams, we expect ourselves to succeed immediately. If we don't, we quietly conclude, maybe this just isn't for me. But what if that thought isn't the truth? What if it's simply an old belief repeating itself, a belief you accepted years ago, a belief you never questioned? Dweck's research points to one uncomfortable reality: the biggest obstacle to growth isn't failure. It's certainty, the certainty that you've already discovered who you are. Because the moment you believe, this is just the way I am, you stop becoming someone new. The people who transform their lives rarely begin with extraordinary talent. They begin with extraordinary honesty, the courage to admit, I don't know, I was wrong, I can improve. Those simple words have changed more lives than natural talent ever will. So before you leave, ask yourself one question: not, am I talented enough? Not, am I smart enough? But, what part of me have I already decided can never change? Because that answer may be the very thing keeping you from the life you were capable of living. And maybe, years from now, you won't remember this documentary, you won't remember my voice or the title, but I hope you'll remember one idea: that the future isn't built by the person you are today. It's built by the person you're willing to become, because in the end, your mindset doesn't just shape your success. It shapes your entire life.